All right, so I guess we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cambridge Veritas TESOL Conversations. This is a new series. Last week we had the opportunity to connect with one of the teachers, one of the colleagues from the fraternity. Those of you, excuse me, my voice is echoing. My voice is echoing. One sec. My apologies. It shouldn't be like this. One sec. Bear with me. Never mind. Sorry, there was an issue of the prompt, so I thought I must check. Last week we had the opportunity to connect with one of our colleagues. And for those of you who do not know me, my name is Krishna Triya. I'm a lecturer at Coventry University, London, and DOS at Cambridge Veritas. My work primarily focuses on teacher education and helping aspiring English teachers sort of develop practical career-ready teaching skills. And today we're discussing what makes an effective TESOL teacher in 2026. And this conversation is for English teachers, teacher trainers, and most importantly, aspiring TESOL professionals. We will also take a few audience's questions towards the end as well. And I'm delighted to welcome Jacopo Castaldi. Jacopo, you have to forgive me for pronouncing your last name if I did incorrectly. Jacopo is a colleague from the fraternity. He's a senior lecturer in applied linguistics at Canterbury Christ Church University. He has extensive experience in English language teaching, teacher training, and TESOL education. Jacopo, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Very well, Krish. Thank you for having me.
You're
Very
welcome.
excited about this chat. So
Excellent. Likewise. So this conversation is going to be very exciting. There are a lot of interesting. We're here to learn from Jacopo's experience today. So Jacopo, my first question to you is: could you briefly share your journey with us in English language teaching, applied linguistics, teacher education? Over to you, please.
thank you. It's been more of a loop than a journey, I guess, between the different aspects that you're mentioning. So my BA was actually in translation and interpreting, and I had no thoughts or even wish to become a teacher at any point because my mom was a teacher and I wanted to do something different from what my mom was doing. So I got into applied linguistics while working on my BA dissertation actually, and then my then tutors kind of pushed me to do a master's in applied linguistics, which I did in Edinburgh and thoroughly enjoyed. It was one of the best experiences academically speaking of my life. And after that, I was kind of, well, as a new graduate, you try to decide what to do, what not to do. I moved back and forth between Italy, my country of origin, and the UK. And when I decided to move permanently to the UK with my then girlfriend, now wife, we were doing, small jobs here and there, and she said, "Why don't we do something a bit meaningful?" So we decided to do a volunteering project in India, in Bhubaneswar, in the east of India. So we went for a month to teach
That's
English
lovely.
in an orphanage. And actually, I found out that I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed teaching. It was very young learners. I had the younger group of the two. So my students, the children were between 4 and 7, but I really enjoyed it. So when I go back to the UK afterwards, I thought, you know what, I'll try and find a job in an English language school, which I did. And then so I spent about 10 years in the same private language school in Margate in the southeast of England. Started off on a week contract in the summer, and ended up being the principal of the school. So I went through all the different stages of the TESOL career ladder, so to speak, from teacher to assistant, director of studies, and then principal. And in that process, I also did 2 postgraduate qualifications. I did a postgraduate diploma in TESOL, which is like the Delta kind of equivalent. And I did a postgraduate diploma in English language teaching management, which is more to do with running a TESOL business, so to speak. And then towards the end of that, I had a niche about doing a PhD. So I started doing a PhD in applied linguistics at Canterbury Christchurch in 2017. Started part-time while still working at the school. And then I was offered a scholarship to switch to full-time. So I left a job in the school and dedicated myself completely to the PhD. And then I was, I guess, lucky enough to land a lecturer job at Christchurch in 2022, straight after finishing my PhD. And I've been there since, doing a mix of linguistics and English language teaching related jobs. We teach also pre-sessional courses, EAP courses. So I've never really left the English teaching profession, so to speak.
Interesting. So I've got a couple of questions based on what you've shared your story. How long was your time in India, Bhubaneswar, please?
So we spent 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
The volunteering project was for 4 weeks.
Interesting. And was that the time when you first sort of started getting into ELT, like informally? Because I think you did not have a TESOL at that time, right?
No, you're absolutely right. So we found this opportunity through it was a company in London, FHEA, that's what it was called.
FHEA.
And basically they offered this kind of volunteering project and the opportunity of a self-certified qualification in English language teaching. It was like a reflective journal basically on the experience. But it gave you, like, as you said, it was an informal way of getting into it. Obviously, because of my applied linguistics background, I had a very strong foundation in English grammar, syntax. So from a technical point of view, so to speak, of the knowledge of the language, I was quite strong already. But I had no experience whatsoever in actually trying to teach someone what their knowledge was about, or even using. We didn't really have course materials in the orphanage, so we just had to sort of improvise a little bit the activities and what we did. We literally just said, I'm talking about back in 2009. That
was actually going to be my next question. Thank you for answering. 2000, long time.
So it's quite a while ago, and in the orphanage it was pretty basic setup. So we didn't have any computers or anything. We didn't even have. I'm not sure if we even had smartphones at that point. We just had like normal mobile phones, and so we're just working off paper and color pens. I remember the girls had their own. We gave each of them like a notebook, and they were writing in it, and I was writing exercises with gap fill exercises for them on their notebook. So it was that kind of very
lovely,
kind of level.
I actually share a very similar story, Jacopo, because the first time when I got into English language teaching, it wasn't like a career path that I had a clear idea of, that I will be in. So one of my teachers had suggested that part-time I should start teaching English, and I did not have any qualifications or certifications. And one of my very good friends, her aunt ran an ELT academy. And she said that she's looking for teachers. So she thought that just because I spoke English well at that time, I could start teaching as well. But to be honest, that was a summer program and I taught for 2 months. And I actually fell in love with the idea of helping people with their communication skills at that time. And that was the starting of my career. And that's when TESOL followed, and then CELTA followed, and then Delta followed. So it's actually, I kind of feel that it's a pattern for many people. They either get inspired from someone, or they get into it because God wants you, and then
I guess
you chart your career. Thank you. Thank you. My
Mm.
this takes me to the next question. So, in your opinion, what distinguishes an effective TESOL teacher? Like you took the TESOL program later, and I took the TESOL program later in our careers,
Mm.
from someone who simply has just very strong English language knowledge.
Mm.
It is quite connected to what we just spoke about. So, what do you
Yeah,
think?
and I think it goes back to the idea of teaching itself as a profession being more of a vocation, so to speak. You know, we certainly don't do this for the money, right? I mean, you know, I don't think any EFL teacher has ever become rich, but I don't think that we are in that for that reason either. You know, I think that our starting point, and I think you put that nicely earlier. I think our starting point is we want to help, you know, people, and I think we're starting from a humanist perspective. You know, I think teachers, generally speaking, have got that kind of humanist approach to life. You know, I
Mm,
think that most teachers as professionals share traits like, you know, being empathetic, being compassionate, and being supportive and wanting to help. So I think really that is the main difference between an effective TESOL teacher and someone, you know, who's done, for example, like me at the point where I only did an applied linguistics degree. Okay, I had all the knowledge that I needed. You know, I
that's
knew
right.
the English language pretty well inside out, and you know, I
Mm,
knew the nuances and everything.
mm,
But really, what kind of put the switch on, so to speak, was the experience of actually being somewhere where you felt you were somehow, you know, helping someone to first of all just to be in a safe space. I think that's the element of that. I had that same experience at Christchurch after Russia invaded the Ukraine. We had an influx of Ukrainian mothers and children in England, and the universities offered free English lessons to
oh,
these to the
interesting.
refugees, and it was the second time in my life after, you know, the experience in Bhubaneswar where I actually felt that that classroom was not just a place of learning; it was actually a safe space. So it was a place where people could kind of, for a little bit, forget about all the, you know, pain and suffering that is in each of everyone's, you know, each of us, you know, and in our lives, and just kind of, you know, feel like they are doing something enjoyable and communal, you know, with the other students, with the teachers, and so on and so forth. So I think that that's the element that really makes a difference between a good teacher, not just a TESOL teacher, any teacher,
Mm,
and a
right.
competent, you
Expert.
know, knowledge person. You know,
Mm,
being able to provide a space where students flourish, and
mm,
we flourish as teachers. You know, it's a two-way conversation. You know, it's not just teacher teaches and students learn. You know, we should be learning every time we step into a
completely.
classroom, and probably that's something else that makes a difference between an effective teacher and somebody else. You know, you have to be prepared to be constantly challenged and wanting to learn more from the
100%.
experiences that you're having.
100%. Thank you so much. Thank you. No, I think you've put there are so many. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you now again. Yes, you froze for a
Perfect.
second, but okay.
I was just in the statement, especially when you become a new teacher, there are so many palpitations that you go through. So my next question is actually related to common mistakes. In your opinion, what do you think are some common mistakes that newly qualified English teachers make? And what are you suggesting in terms of how can strong teacher them overcome those mistakes or challenges? I think challenges would be a better word. So,
Hmm.
what do you think?
Yeah, probably. I think the main challenge is establishing or embracing a different identity to the one that we normally have. You know, ultimately, when you do like a teacher training course or similar, they talk about this idea of a teacher persona, right? So you have to kind of become somehow someone different. And I think sometimes the challenge is that that division is too strict between who you are and who you are as a teacher. I
That's
think
right.
maybe finding a symbiotic balance between your own self and your teacher persona is probably the hardest thing. You want to be obviously seen as someone who can guide that classroom and guide the learning and teaching, but you
Mhm.
don't want to be seen as some kind of distant robot or authoritarian kind of figure that imposes almost the learning onto the students. So I think
Mhm.
that idea of finding your own voice and your own teaching persona um, can be a bit challenging. And maybe newly qualified teachers or new teachers may go too much one way or the other. I.e.,
Mhm.
they might totally go I'm the teacher, I'm in charge, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna be in command of everything that happens in this classroom.
Mhm.
Or on the other hand, they're gonna be like, I'm not a teacher, I'm their friend, and that doesn't work either. There has to
So
be
much
a good balance
balance.
between being supportive and being approachable and friendly, but
Mhm.
also being authoritative and guiding enough that there is learning and teaching happening, and not just a pleasant hour conversing in the class. So I think that's probably a good challenge. Maybe like a strong teacher training program should maybe try and support
Mhm.
newly qualified teachers or new teachers in that process of finding that balance.
100%. In fact, the moment you started talking about not being too friendly, I have a very funny incident to share with you and our audience watching right now. So many years ago, I was watching this class of all adults. It was a teacher training program. Um, and so I was, there, something had happened, it rains a lot in London. So I got 10 minutes late in class. And I used to be quite friendly, like 5, 6 years ago in class. When I say friendly, I mean, like you said, it's very important to have that right balance. It doesn't matter if you're teaching young learners or adults, and no matter what
Mm,
program you're teaching. So one of the students said, "We know who to learn to be on time, on." And I think that was an opportunity for me to sort of reflect, uh, and also to sort of I say it in good spirit because it was a good learning curve for me, as a trainer, and I did mention that to the class openly, and it was a face-to-face session. That it's important to have that friendly balance between you and your learners, but at the same time we need to understand that friendliness does not communicate to uh, uh, forgetting the boundaries of our relationship with each other, because eventually I'm not your friend. But it was a good learning curve for me personally, to be
mm,
honest, to understand that you either don't have to be a completely, like you said, authoritative figure in class or a completely friendly figure. That balance only comes with experience.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think it comes as well when you start teaching. It comes from having good, more senior colleagues
That's
and
right.
managers actually, because I do remember also as a manager
Hmm.
having to navigate between some of the stricter colleagues that, if you like, had feedback from the students as being a bit too much kind of thing and too
Hmm.
distant, and that maybe sometimes younger colleagues actually that felt, because maybe they were also closer in age, I guess.
Hmm.
They felt
Probably.
more like they were almost part of the student
Mhm.
group than the teacher one. So yeah. Mm,
Lovely. So we've just spoken about new teacher challenges, and I think now it's time to slightly talk about a little bit of classroom practice from the perspective of teacher trainers. So my next question is actually, in your opinion, how should a high quality TESOL program balance theory, or for that matter, practical teaching, observation and feedback, or for that matter, reflective practice? So, how do you think a good teacher training TESOL program should balance these things in today's day and age?
That's a good question. So, as part of when I was working at English language school, we also ran the certificate in TESOL, the training one. And obviously, you are kind of given a structure, of things that you need to cover and bits of assessment that you need to do. And I kind of felt that the main problem with many of these kind of short courses that you haven't actually got enough time to do all of these things properly, I would say. Like, I guess it depends what kind of level teacher training qualification you're doing, if it's the initial kind of CELTA type or a Delta one. I think teachers should have a strong theoretical knowledge. I do believe that. I mean, ultimately, as I said earlier, the aspects of the authority, so to speak, and I'm not talking about authority as in like being strict or disciplinarian. I'm not saying authority as in like somebody who can answer questions that come in from the students in a knowledgeable way. That's what I mean, obviously.
That's right.
That needs to be there. I mean, ultimately, we are paid, and the students pay to learn content as well, right? They want to learn how to speak better, how to communicate better, and I think like there has to be a strong theoretical knowledge there. But as we said earlier, that doesn't. It's not enough, to know things. You have to be able to pass them on. And I think like the most valuable bits in a teacher training program are the actual practice and observation, feedback, reflection cycle. When I first approached the profession and like knew that I had to do so many hours of observed teaching, was very nervous about it, because you think like oh my god, I mean what's going to happen, what they're going to say, and I found it very useful actually. I found it useful even later on during the diploma, video recording myself and watch me teaching, because like even the harshest of observer would probably not be as harsh as yourself as an observer, so to speak. They would probably not want to make you feel bad on certain things or offend you, whereas you're observing yourself, you can be very critical and like oh my god, what the hell were you doing there, like why are you moving so much, or why are you gesticulating so much, why are you using that word so much. So I think that it's important that aspect is given priority. So the practical aspects, but coupled with observations, feedback, and reflection, I think it's really, really important. And reflection doesn't stop at how did we do, and what could we do better. But I think reflection should really be extended to what was used in a lesson, and why did it not work well. So it's not just us as teachers, but also what we have and what we could find as an alternative sometimes to what we have available to us as instruments. So yes, to be maybe that's something that maybe could be implemented a bit more, like better critical awareness of the tools that we have as teachers, and how to reflect on their not only effectiveness but also appropriateness in terms of the pedagogical aims of our lessons. But as we said earlier, we're not just teaching content, we're also creating a humanistic space for growth.
100%.
How does our practice and the stuff that we use also encourage or hinder that kind of personal growth dimension of the classroom?
Loved what you said, actually, and I'm going to put it on the screen for the audience. You said humanistic space of growth. It's quite interesting. What do you mean by that? Could you elucidate a little more, please? I find this particular phrasing quite interesting. I do understand the essence of this, but if you could just elucidate a little more for the audience watching.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I guess it goes back to those two experiences where I felt quite strongly about what I was doing, being not so much about teaching, but more about providing a space for peace and tranquility and soul nourishment, so to speak. And I think that that there is the element, and the element I think should be in obviously there are different contexts on there for English language teaching. You have the more, I guess, industry type of context where the students pay and sometimes pay quite a lot of money, and they're there maybe for a short period of time. They got very specific goals of passing an exam or whatever. So it's very instrumental, so to speak. And maybe we believe that our job there is simply to make sure that they pass the exam or get the grades that they need. But there are many other contexts in which English language teaching or any other teaching happens, for that matter, that are not necessarily so instrumental in nature. And obviously the experience in the orphanage and the experience with the refugees are two clear examples of that. Obviously, the children and the refugees wanted to learn the language to be able to integrate in the new country and so on and so forth. But ultimately, they were dealing with a lot of trauma, effectively.
100%.
And I think it's our role as teachers to be able to understand and engage with that level of our human nature. And again, so when I say like a humanistic approach, that's what I mean. Like it's realizing that it's not just a transactional exercise. You need to learn, and I'm teaching you whatever it is that you need to learn, and you pay money for it. There is the element of like ultimately there are people behind both the teachers and the students,
100%.
and it's a win-win situation if everybody grows as a person as well as a learner or a teacher. So I guess that's what I kind of mean by humanistic space for growth. We want to grow as individuals ultimately.
100%.
And I think that if we haven't got that drive, perhaps we shouldn't be in the teaching profession. I think like being a teacher ultimately is realizing that you have a responsibility in facilitating human growth, and I mean by human growth I mean like a nourishing of knowledge, of soul, of intents, of ambitions, and so on and so forth.
How beautiful. I mean, quite an interesting food for thought. I remember yesterday we were having discussions around AI, and I was quite intrigued with what you said, and I'd love to hear more on that. So we're now going to be looking at themes around culture and teaching material. Jacopo, I know that your research has been around culture. So my next question is actually around that. So I'd like to ask, in your opinion, what role do you think culture should play in English language teaching, and how do young teachers or experienced teachers, how can they avoid stereotypical representations?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing up the fact that this is one of the areas that I do research in. Yeah, I mean it's been a concern for a few decades. The idea of what do we do when we teach English or any other language for that matter. Again, it's not a matter necessarily of English, but obviously this is what we're talking about, right? We're talking about teaching English here. And even back in the late 1990s and early 2000s, you had practitioners and academics that basically were criticizing the industry of English language teaching as being a kind of be more than just soft cultural power by entities like the British Council or equivalent organizations, but more almost an attempt to standardize English and equate it to Britishness or American, as in United States culture. And the industry and the way it works, especially if you're in the more kind of teaching students for exams and teaching through different CEFR levels and so on and so forth using course books, it's been kind of fed a lot by this big organization type of discourse. So you had very successful textbooks, the Headway and
English file.
English File, the ones that we all know and use, right?
Absolutely.
And they do, and again, there's a lot of research in this. They do portray a certain type of culture, certain type of values within the stories that they embed, the narratives that they embed. And I think it's our role as teachers is to be able to kind of critically engage with that. And first of all, realize that culture is not as monolithic as we may think it is. Being British or being American or being Indian or Italian doesn't actually mean anything from a cultural point of view. The fact that two people share the same nationality on a passport doesn't mean that they would behave, think, and feel the same about almost anything. You can have as many different cultures within a country as you can have kind of a global level. So I think if we can start from that assumption as teachers, as educators, and understand that, well, there is a certain level of individual cultural uniqueness in each and every one of us, then we can approach the material that we use in that kind of light. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to change all the materials that we have, but it does mean that we can make them observation or comment while using it that kind of make the student also realize that, okay, so this is one possible way of being British, American, or whatever, but it's not the only way. I guess what we don't want is that, all students looking at Britain think that everybody eats fish and chips every day or has, bacon and sausages for breakfast, right? And I'm using rituals and
not everybody's doing
habits, but that's the same as then thinking not all British love the monarchy or
not all British,
or are warmongers. It's there are different cultures within Britain, and there are different cultures within the US and Italy and India, Japan, China, whatever you want to look at. So I guess that's probably what I would suggest that people and teachers do. They should kind of, again, critically. I'm going to be using this word critically a lot, I think, today, but they should kind of engage critically with what they have at their disposal, the tools that they have, and these days it's a bit easier than it used to be in 2009 or in the 2010s and so on, where literally a course book would be the only thing that you had access to. I mean, these days we do have access to a lot more through the internet and so on and so forth. And although there are challenges there as well, and I guess we'll discuss that a bit later. It also opens up a lot of opportunities, right? To create their own materials or to choose, a video clip or something which we think would reflect better a situation that we are using in the classroom, whether it's a real life situation like getting on a train and going on a journey or buying your groceries in a shop or whatever.
This reminds me, thank you so much for answering it so beautifully. Many years ago, I was making this general English program for a school in India, Jacopo. And when I was talking to the director of the school, so in one of the conversations, he said, I mean, and I know Headway and English File are the industry standards, the top ones, if we had to sort of pick and choose from options. So I said, why not start using English File? It's got interesting content. I wasn't at that time looking at it from the representation point of view and that critical lens that you've elucidated in your answer. So, and his comment was at that time which was a very interesting comment. He said, we cannot only rely on English file because it doesn't capture the cultural aspect of the audience that we are working with right now, which was a beautiful point. And to be honest, that point didn't make much sense to me then. But then as you grow older into your own industry, you kind of realize that, yes, it was such a valid point. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. It is important, and and it's also a matter of, if you think about, I mean, this is kind of I guess, a wider concern, and people may not necessarily agree with what I'm about to say, but I do believe that quite strongly, that a lot of the kind of issues that people have these days, especially from a mental well-being point of view, is this constant comparison with this successful other, whatever that successful other is, right? And unfortunately, I think that course books can kind of contribute to that problem, meaning that showing this kind of perfect family in this country who've got all these lovely, wonderful things and do all these wonderful experiences actually can negatively impact on somebody in a kind of more, how to say, well, in a different kind of sociocultural background that hasn't got access to certain things, and who thinks that in order to be happy, you need to have this particular object that this family in the course book has, these gadgets, for example, or they need to be able to experience traveling around the world and something else, otherwise they'll never be happy. And I think, we, again, I'm going back to our responsibility as educator and our responsibility as professionals who need to navigate those issues. We need to be, first of all, aware of those ourselves. So we need to grow, we need to learn, we need to be curious and critical. But then we also need to be able to negotiate those aspects within our classroom. So yeah, totally agree with what your colleague said back then, and yeah, and I'm glad that people have been kind of thinking that for so long.
For so long, yes,
it
absolutely.
is great. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for those teachers who are watching our conversation and tuning to our conversation right now, do you have any practical pieces of advice? How can they adapt international course material, which has kind of become the industry standard? For example, if you, no matter where you teach at the British Council, you have to teach from English file. That is the constant. That's what they sell to students as well. So, how can the teachers watching us right now adapt international course material to their local learners, while at the same time connecting it to our foregone statement, what you said, protecting the lesson aims and also representation and learning outcomes as well? Do you have any practical pieces of advice for them, please?
I mean, the way I try to deal with that is I would start from what the aim and the learning outcome is. So, do they have to learn how to use the past perfect and past continuous? Is that the goal for today's lesson, or is like talking about past events? And I think the in a way the easiest thing, which is also the hardest, but it's easier if you approach it in such a way from the get-go with your class, is really finding out what the students can bring to the table. So try as much as possible to use their experiences, their background knowledge, and make that the theme or the topic of the lesson, rather than this random family in this random stereotypical family in a foreign country that you may have never been to and may even never have a chance to go to, right? So I think the good thing that these course books do, and I do believe that there's a space for them. I don't think that they are the evil and should be discarded altogether. They do provide structure. They are pedagogically sound in the sense that they do attempt to scaffold the knowledge from one unit to the other, from one lesson to the other. And a lot of the type of exercises that they suggest you do, whether it's like for controlled practice or freer practice or receptive skills, productive skills, and so on and so forth, they are based on sound pedagogical principles and research very often. I think what we can do is strip, so to speak, the kind of cultural situational elements of the course books, go to the core skeleton of the pedagogical and learning outcomes, and build on it with what we actually have in the classroom in our context. That I would say is probably my suggestion. That's the way I try to approach it anyway. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you can't access certain things. Sometimes you haven't got enough time to actually rejig a whole lesson. But again, if it's a working principle,
It's a working
and
principle.
if the students as well kind of buy into that working principle and start to almost contribute off their own back ideas and themes and topics, then it makes it, again, first of all, it makes it like a two-way conversation, which again
100%.
I think the classroom should be. And then it makes your life a little bit easier because the student brings in the content, the theme, the context, the topic, and
Context.
you can kind of bring in the content knowledge of whatever grammatical, syntactical, or lexical aspect it is that you are trying to teach them.
Not easy, but very,
No,
very definitely, I
true.
think, comes with experience. But I think it's an amazing point because just to add to what you said, I think it also helps students build great fluency because then they are used to drawing from the experience whenever they have to talk about something, and especially helps them with public speaking and extempore, I
Mm,
suppose, because the teacher has, in a very subtle way, like you've with the piece of advice that you've mentioned, the teacher has, in a very subtle way, built a habit where whenever they have to talk, they draw their language from the real experiences that they've felt and gone through,
mm,
which I think really helps with public speaking. Just an extra point that I wanted to mention here.
absolutely. No, that's totally. I mean, can you imagine us here not talking about this, which is our life and interest, but
100%.
talking about, I don't know, swimwear or some kind of fashion? Can you imagine how awkward we would sound and be just because it's
Absolutely.
not our interest, it's not our language? And
100%.
I think we need to realize that it's the same for students. They're not all going to be interested in discussing
Mm.
politics or societal issues. Some of them want to
Absolutely.
talk about fashion and the
Absolutely.
latest kind of music hit by this
Beautiful
particular
point.
artist, right?
Beautiful point. I was just going to say, and you actually you stole the word from my tongue, and that was I get really awkward when it comes to talking about politics with my friends. The closest of the closest friends, for that matter,
Hmm.
because I feel that that's not the context that makes me comfortable talking about, even with my closest friends, for that matter.
Hmm.
So I think it's different with different people. So yeah, amazing point. Thank you so much. Uh, all right. This question that I have, the next question for you, Jacopo, is the it question of our times today, and this is about AI and technology. So I wanted to know how are digital tools and AI, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, Copilot, in your opinion, how are they changing TESOL today, and which developments do you think should teachers approach thoughtfully?
Mm. Mm. I mean, that's such a good question because it's such a topical question, and it's also a difficult question to answer because it's so much
It's not easy. Yes.
fluid and in becoming that
That's right.
it's hard to stop and consider it. But
Mm,
obviously, we will try our best. I
yes.
mean, I think there are clear advantages
Mhm.
of this kind of software and technology, and again, especially if you want to adapt your material, if you want to create, for example, dialogues or gap fill exercises that are not based on some obscure country and culture somewhere, but that is more relevant to the students. then it is a lot easier to stick the prompts into, Claude or ChatGPT and get something out of it. You know, in I said earlier, I used to, when I was in Bhubaneswar at the orphanage, I would write the gap fill exercises in each of the students' notebook, which would take ages. I mean, you can imagine me writing this thing in 5 different notebooks by hand. So clearly there is that aspect that, like, you can do that a lot quicker, and then do it a lot more often as well, right? Because it does save time. The tricky bit there is, and again, I don't think that it's alien to what we've been discussing so far, because I think it's the same principle applied to something different, is to again be aware of how we actually prompt these generative AI systems. So what prompts do we use?
Mm.
And B, again, to critically assess the kind of content that we get back from them. Because it is pretty well known that, like any of us, any humans, we all got our own biases, we all got our own preferences, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, the Claude, ChatGPT, and so on and so forth are an agglomerate of the most common biases,
Sees.
opinions, and so on and so forth. Now,
Correct.
if something is more common, it's not necessarily true or right. Okay, I mean, otherwise, people like Galileo back in the day, who was saying that the Earth is not flat, or the it is the Earth kind of going around the sun and not the other way around,
Mm.
was wrong. It wasn't wrong. It was still right, even if it was the minority kind of opinion. So we need to be a bit careful in that respect to again vet very carefully what comes out of these generative AI programs. And we're having a little chat yesterday, was saying that there's research coming out in the last 5 years or so where they have actually tested different generative AI platform by using different prompts, and getting very often very stereotypical,
Very
again,
stereotypical.
representations of certain cultures, of certain situations, um, and and we need to be careful with that. Basically, the same as we would need to be careful with a textbook and what's in a textbook. The same as we would need to be careful with whatever we produce our own heads, which will have their its own biases.
It's only biases.
We need
Yes.
to be careful. It's all about that. It's all about being, again, critical and critically aware of what it is that we are doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what kind of possible implications and effects it could have on our
Very
students.
conscious effort.
Mm,
100%. It's a very conscious effort constantly, which also end up, I think, eventually helps us, I think, continuously improve, I'd say. Uh,
absolutely.
I would like to, I'm not sure if you're comfortable talking about it, but yesterday in our conversation, you mentioned about how uh, ChatGPT was given a prompt of a rich Indian family versus a poor Indian family, and how representation and biases were created in the pictures. In fact, when you discussed it, I ended up doing that myself, and I could actually see how relevant of a point it was that you'd mentioned, because it was. Because representation can be of all types. It's only somebody wearing a turban versus somebody who's not, or somebody wearing an Indian kurta, a linen cotton kurta
Mm,
versus somebody who's not. You know what I'm trying to say? So,
absolutely.
so I think that was a fantastic point. Do you have anything else to add to that point, please? And because I was quite intrigued with what you said about it yesterday.
Um, well, I mean, yeah, as I was saying to you, that there are papers that basically kind of did this kind of experiments, so to
Mm.
speak, and most of the times, unless the prompt were very carefully crafted, if they were a bit sort of naively inputted, um, the whether it was images or text that were generated were very much biased in one way or another. And actually, we had this very good discussion at university. So we have this professor, Adrian Holiday, whose whole idea about culture is that there isn't a big monolithic culture, but there are small cultures, so to speak. So he had this exercise in investigating, interrogating ChatGPT about culture. And his position as an academic is a minoritarian one. The majority of academics, when it comes to the cultural communication, would work off, the work of Hofstede and colleagues, who had this kind of very monolithic idea of culture. So if you're from a collectivist culture like China or Japan, you will behave in that way. If you're from an individualistic one,
versus individualistic.
You will behave in a different way. Now, when this colleague sort of prompted ChatGPT about culture, the first answers were all based on the Hofstede approach to
Hofstede's
culture.
dimension, cultural dimensions.
Then the colleague started questioning ChatGPT, and ChatGPT actually admitted that they only used what seemed to be the prevalent kind of way of looking at culture.
Framework.
But yes, it is true. There are criticism about that. So again, when we look at technology and AI, neither of them is inherently good or bad. It's what we do with it, right? The only problem with AI compared to more neutral technology, so to speak, like a smartphone or whatever, is that it has got some kind of statistical grounding in whatever is being produced by us as humans. And as we know, us as humans are biased in very many different ways. And AI does pick up on that, and if you don't question it further, if you stop at the first, if you like, response that you get, you're just going to get the most kind of commonly believed opinion about something. So yeah, these are two examples of how
Thank you.
a naive engagement with AI is more detrimental than beneficial to our professions, and also again to what then happens in the classroom, of the kind of opinions and ideas that are formed into our students' minds as well.
100%. No, amazing point. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think it's the fact that you mentioned about Hofstede's cultural dimension and how ChatGPT uses in believed frameworks that are working in that particular time and not critically analyzing it can actually lead to the representation and cultural issues, biases that we've just been talking about. Thank you. This leads us to one last question for the day. And this question is, what advice do you have for teachers who want to build a credible and sustainable and internationally relevant TESOL career today?
Again, very good question. I mean, I think of the words that you have there, I like the very first one, the credible. I mean, ultimately, as professionals, we survive based on how credible we are, and that is based on, if you like, the sum of all the aspects that we discussed so far. So do we actually know our content as we should, as each, so do we have the content knowledge of what it is that we're teaching? But most importantly, are we creating a classroom environment where kind of nourishment and flourishing is actually possible? And I think, especially when the content itself is so easily accessible online and in different platforms, I think what would make a difference even more is that kind of humanistic aspect that we were talking about earlier. And I think that's probably the one way of actually building, again, a sustainable career. So showing that we're not just kind of content transmitters, so to speak. Because to be honest with you, probably internet sources, even AI, are better content transmitters than we are. Their knowledge of grammar and syntax. You try and write something and ask ChatGPT to write it, 9 times out of 10, it would be better written by ChatGPT. So content-wise, we can't compete, right? But I think that kind of the empathy and the understanding of our students that we can display and kind of build on in the classroom is what AI or technology in general can't really do. Like even the screen that's dividing us now doesn't allow us to perhaps be a deeper, stronger relationship that we could have if we were meeting in person, right? And then perhaps going for a coffee after this talk and
100%.
talk about our families and talk about what do we actually do outside of this, right? And I think that that is going to be part of being relevant going
Mhm.
forward. Being able to be uh, like a human engagement kind of I don't know how to define it, but like a human engagement facilitator, basically. So trying to build up on our human capacities and human beings rather than the technological progress and AI, which it's taking its own shape
Mhm.
as we speak.
Mhm. Amazing point. And I see how beautifully you have actually connected the answer to this question to what you've been consistently saying since the beginning in the conversation, which I think is great. That humanistic approach,
Mm,
scope of growth, what you'd mentioned initially,
mm,
I think that has to that's what kind of makes you unique and um, a language teacher, facilitator, as opposed to, let's say, well, nothing against mathematics teacher, but as opposed to teachers of other subjects. So there's that. And I think one reason that we created the Cambridge Veritas TESOL program, also, I'd love to have you have conversations about critical analysis around that also with you, was our intention was we wanted to reduce, that there's a gap between when you complete a qualification, let's say a bachelor's degree in applied linguistics, versus when you feel that you're actually ready for
mm,
real teaching opportunities. So there was a clear gap that we saw, especially in the MENA region, or for that matter, South Asian region. So we decided that alongside training, we will, as a school, focus on building a teaching portfolio for the teachers, like what we generally do on a TESOL or a CELTA program. But it's going to be a digital teaching portfolio where it shows and represents the career readiness of teachers who are under training, and most importantly, be able to give that placement support as well that they kind of lack. For example, many teachers, they may know everything about the CELTA teaching methodology or a TESOL teaching methodology, but the moment when it comes to delivering a demo lesson, every information fades away because
mhm,
you have so
mm.
much palpitation. you know so that was the idea. So my question to you is, what can new teachers do to make themselves more employable today, in your opinion?
Hmm. That's a very good question. Make themselves more employable. Maybe it is understanding that their role goes beyond teaching itself. It's yeah, embracing the responsibility, I would say, that comes with being a teacher. Not just think of teaching as a a job or something that we do because we have to do. I mean, if you go back like thousands of years, like the idea of teaching and educating has always been something that transcended the subject matter, so to speak.
Mm,
And I think that the the way in which societies these days work with all these exams and everything has kind of stripped a little bit away that higher value of teaching and education, which was originally embedded with it. So I would
mm,
say, but I think that people do appreciate that. So I think that for being more employable, so to speak, is basically showing that not only do we know the subject matter that we're teaching, but that we actually are interested and committed to improving whatever it is the context that we are trying to work in, whether it's like in a state school, or whether it's like a private institutions, whether it's like it's a volunteering kind of setting. But I would say that people do appreciate the fact that we are more than just teachers. So probably I would say find and build on that kind of vocational commitment that the first took you towards the teaching profession. It's not a job. We don't do it for the money. We do it for the human connections that we are able to create. And I think that
Beautiful.
we need to highlight and foreground that aspect. And I think that would make us more employable as well, actually, because people as much as we don't see it, I think people really strive for that human connection at all levels. And I think if somebody can offer that on top of being a good knowledge transmitter, so to speak, I think that enhances the employability opportunities as well.
100%, 100%. No, thank you so much. These are all the questions that I have for you today. Thank you for being so patient for answering these questions. And if the audience has any questions, please do feel free to put your questions in the comment section. But I think it's been such a pleasure. I think we've discussed. There are so many themes that we've discussed. We've spoken around how can we adapt material, or for that matter, AI, and culture, most importantly. So many interesting themes that we've discussed. I do see there are no questions at the moment, but if there's anybody, feel free to reach out and shoot your questions. Jacopo, do you have any closing comments for the audience and for those watching?
I mean, at Christchurch where I work, we use the 3 C's, right, to describe, if like the ethos of our university. So I do like that idea of having 3 C's of something for us as professionals, right? And my 3 C's, and our viewers can perhaps add more C's if they want, but would be to be curious, to be critical, and to be creative. I think if we can nourish these 3 kind of qualities as professionals, the whole profession will kind of, and I think society at large will benefit from it. But there are more C's that can be added. So
100%.
if your viewers can have more C's or any other kind of adjective to add there. But I think that those 3 are very important: curious, always learning, learning never stops; critical, because we need to always be aware that whatever we do has got an impact on our
That's
lives
right.
and other people's lives; and creative, because we need to find ways around problems, right? And a classroom, it's a living problem all the time. So being able to negotiate and navigate those problems with creativity, I think it's another skill that we really need to have as teachers.
One of our audience members, Hani from LinkedIn, has a question for Jacopo. Hani, I'm going to show the first question, and that Hani's question is, Jacopo, this is a question from Hani. What habits or routines help TESOL teachers remain effective, reflective, and adaptable? What do you think, Jacopo? That's a very good question, isn't it?
That's a very good question. I would say never, ever, ever repeat the same lesson twice. That's
Interesting.
would be like the one kind of suggestion that I'd have. I mean, whether the lesson goes very well or whether it goes terribly wrong, it's not a good reason to either keep on doing it as it is or disregarding it. I mean, the beauty of our profession, I think, is that each lesson is different than the previous one. Even if the students are the same, even if you are the same, the fact that you're feeling, happier or sadder on any given day would kind of change the dynamics of a classroom. So I think always reflect and never either be complacent or too destructivist of what you've done. Like, be kind of, reflective and strive to improve. That's definitely a habit that helps improving.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, because it continues to keep you on your toes.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you should be on your toes.
You should be on your toes. Absolutely,
Yes.
100%. Uh, we have another question. This is from YouTube by Meditation and Peace. If I'm not mistaken, that is Shivanshi. Shivanshi's completed her TESOL from us.
Okay.
So Shivanshi has a question. Thank you so much for your wonderful session. You're welcome, Shivanshi. My question is, what techniques do you use to encourage shy students to participate in the lesson confidently? Very good question. Over to you.
I think, again, it goes back to the creating that atmosphere where students know they can contribute their own selves. So setting up activities that allow them to choose, for example, topics, themes, content, also helps a bit with their confidence. As we said earlier, if we put Krish and I into a room and talk about economics, you probably won't hear many words from maybe from Krish a bit more than from me. But I would be totally like a fish out of water, basically. I think it's the same principle and same idea. Ultimately we are looking after also the kind of psychological aspects of teaching and learning, right? And I think one of those things, especially confidence, is connected with the idea of whether or not you're talking about something that you care about and that you know something about, you have some interest in. And I think the easiest way, although it's not very easy in terms of practically organizing it, but the easiest way to encourage people to contribute is to allow them to bring themselves into the lesson.
Interesting. Thank you so much. This is I would say I've truly enjoyed the conversation so far. We were aiming for 45 minutes, but thank you, Jacopo, for your time.
Okay.
We've gone over 1 hour. I've genuinely enjoyed our conversation today. And for those of you who have more questions, let's be curious, I would say. The 3 C's that Jacopo's mentioned, and yes, definitely, it can be different for different people. Being curious along those questions, being critical, no matter what information you find, and being constantly creative. I think this is one of the most important takeaways personally for me from our conversation. Thank you so much, Jacopo, for your time. How do you pronounce your last name, though?
No, you pronounce it very well in the first place. Castaldi. That's
Castaldi.
it. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. I mean, Italian in that sense is quite easy. As you see it, that's how you pronounce it.
Yes, yes, Castaldi.
But no, that was you've done that very, very nicely
Thank
in the
you.
beginning. So thank you so much. And again, thank you so
Absolutely.
much for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation. I mean, I really, really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, and keep the good work up with Cambridge Veritas, and I'm sure that your
Thank you.
teacher trainees will be most appreciative of these opportunities that they get.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. And I think the good work, like you said, it's it is not a job. It is a humanistic scope of growth. So many takeaways, my God.
I'm glad.
Good. Thank you so much to all the audience who watched us, who've been with us throughout this conversation. We hope that it's been insightful for you, for experienced teachers watching, for young teachers watching, new teachers, newly qualified teachers watching. And stay tuned. All I would say is, I think it is a wonderful profession, and it really helps us. I mean, there are students that come to you even after years and they say they moved to a different country and how you helped them many years ago. I think it's just beautiful. So yes, like Jacopo said, it's a service. It's not a job, which I think is beautiful. Thank you for your time, Jacopo. Really appreciate it, and
Thank you,
looking forward
Krish,
to
and
meet
thank you
up
for
again.
everyone for being here and attending. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.